The broadcast reached every inhabited world in the Calarian Empire within 3 standard cycles. Across 14,000 star systems, beings of 47 different species watched their screens with varying degrees of interest, boredom, or satisfaction. The Calarian High Command had made sure of that. They wanted every citizen, every subject, every slave species to witness what happened to those who dared resist imperial authority. Admiral Zektar stood on the observation deck of the execution platform, his 4 arms crossed behind his back in a gesture of supreme confidence. Below him, 70,000 humans knelt in perfect rows across the crystalline surface of Morthen Station. The space station had been chosen specifically for this purpose. Its transparent dome allowed viewers across the galaxy to see the prisoners clearly against the backdrop of empty space. The humans were silent. No weeping, no begging, no desperate prayers to whatever primitive deities their species worshipped. They simply knelt there, faces upturned toward the cameras, eyes defiant even in their final moments. Zektar found their composure irritating. "Begin the announcement," he commanded through his neural implant. The familiar voice of Imperial announcer Veltash filled the dome and echoed across the galaxy. "Citizens of the Calarian Empire, witness the fate of those who dare challenge our righteous rule. These 70,000 humans were captured during their failed rebellion on Proxima Centauri. They chose violence against their betters. They chose destruction over submission. Today they face the consequences of their choice." Zektar stepped forward, his voice amplifying through the station's speakers. "Humans," he called out, savoring the word like a curse. "Your species has proven itself incapable of peaceful integration into our empire. You fight when you should submit. You resist when you should serve. You believe your primitive notions of freedom and dignity place you above your station." A human near the front, a female with graying hair and lieutenant's stripes on her torn uniform, raised her head higher. "We fight because it's right," she called back, her voice carrying clearly in the dome's acoustics. "We fight because our children deserve better than slavery." Several Calarian guards moved forward. Energy weapons raised, but Zektar waved them back. "Let her speak. Let the galaxy hear the desperate words of a dying species. It would make their extinction all the more poetic. Your children will serve the Empire, human. Those who survive today's lesson will understand their place. They will see that resistance leads only to death." The woman smiled, actually smiled, and Zektar felt his confidence waver slightly. "Admiral," she said, somehow knowing his rank without being told. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen, formerly of the Human Defense Corps. I want you to remember that name. I want you to remember all our names." She gestured to the thousands of humans around her. "We're not just numbers in your execution tally. We're teachers, engineers, doctors, parents. We're soldiers who chose to fight for something bigger than ourselves. And when our people learn what you've done here today, when they see what the great Calarian Empire is really about, they'll understand something important." Zektar leaned forward, curiosity overcoming his irritation. "And what is that, human?" "That mercy is weakness to you, that honor is meaningless, that you'll kill civilians and call it justice." Chen's voice grew stronger, carrying to every camera, every transmission relay. "You're not just executing us, Admiral. You're teaching humanity exactly what kind of enemy we're fighting." Before Zektar could respond, Chen continued, "You think you're ending a rebellion today, but you're really starting a war." The Admiral's laugh boomed through the dome. "A war? You pathetic creatures can barely maintain coherent governments on your scattered colonies. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your armies are nothing more than organized militia groups with salvaged equipment. What war could you possibly fight?" "The only kind that matters," Chen replied quietly. "A war where we have nothing left to lose." Zektar had heard enough. He raised his primary hand, and across the platform, 10,000 Kalarian executioners activated their disintegration beams. The humans didn't flinch. They didn't close their eyes. They looked directly into the cameras as the energy weapons charged. "For our children," Commander Chen said, her words carrying across subspace to every human colony, every ship, every listening post in human space. "For our future." The beams fired simultaneously. 70,000 points of light flared and died across the platform. Where humans had knelt moments before, only empty space remained. The silence that followed was absolute. Zektar turned to face the primary camera. "This is the fate that awaits all who oppose the Kalarian Empire. Submit and live. Resist and join these fools in oblivion. The choice is yours." The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, beings returned to their daily lives. The Kalarians filed reports of successful intimidation tactics. The subject species noted another demonstration of imperial power. Everything proceeded exactly as the High Command had planned. Everything except the human response. Captain James Rodriguez was 3 light-years away when the execution began, leading a supply convoy to the agricultural colonies in the Ross 154 system. His ship, the cargo hauler Defiant Spirit, wasn't much to look at. Converted mining vessel, patched armor, weapons cobbled together from salvaged parts. But it was fast, and it was crewed by humans who'd already lost everything that mattered to them. The transmission reached them as they were loading grain shipments for the journey back to Earth. Rodriguez watched the entire broadcast in the ship's cramped communications center, surrounded by his crew of 12. They watched their friends, their families, their fellow soldiers die in silence. When it ended, nobody spoke for a long time. "Orders, Captain?" asked Lieutenant Maria Santos, his second in command. Her voice was steady, professional, but Rodriguez could see the fury burning behind her eyes. "Get me a channel to Fleet Command," Rodriguez said quietly. "Priority Alpha, then signal the convoy. We're changing course." "Sir?" "The colonies are expecting these supplies." Rodriguez looked at his crew, miners, farmers, teachers who'd picked up weapons when the Kalarians invaded. People who'd joined the Human Defense Corps not because they wanted to fight, but because they couldn't stand to watch their species be enslaved. "The colonies will have to wait," he said. "We have work to do." The message Rodriguez sent to Fleet Command was brief. 70,000 of our people are dead. Request permission to begin unrestricted warfare against all Kalarian targets." He didn't wait for a response. By the time Earth could receive and reply to his transmission, he planned to be deep in Kalarian space. But Rodriguez wasn't the only human captain who'd watched the broadcast. Across human space, on ships large and small, the response was immediate and unanimous. Supply convoys changed course toward the frontier. Merchant vessels began broadcasting coded messages to underground resistance cells. Civilian transports that had been fleeing the war zones turned around and headed back toward the fighting. Admiral Rebecca Torres received the first reports 6 hours after the execution. She stood in the command center of Indomitable, humanity's newest and most advanced battleship, reading message after message from ship commanders requesting permission to engage the enemy. "Ma'am," reported Commander Williams, her intelligence officer, "we're receiving similar requests from every human vessel in our network. Military, civilian, even the medical transports are asking for combat assignments." Torres studied the tactical display showing human ship movements throughout their territory. Every vessel was converging on the frontier zones where Kalarian forces had established their occupation lines. "What's our total force strength?" she asked. "Approximately 4,300 vessels of all classes. Maybe 200 of those could be considered proper warships." "And the Kalarians? In this sector alone, over 12,000 ships, including 6 dreadnoughts and 30 battle cruisers." Torres nodded slowly. The numbers were exactly what everyone expected. Humanity was outnumbered, outgunned, and operating with technology that the Calarians considered obsolete. By any rational military analysis, they should surrender now and try to negotiate better terms for their species. But Torres was thinking about Commander Chen's last words. A war where we have nothing left to lose. She activated the general communications channel, broadcasting to every human ship in range. This is Admiral Torres to all vessels. You've seen what the Empire thinks of us. You've seen what they consider justice. They want us to submit out of fear. They want us to accept slavery because the alternative is death. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. But they've made a critical error. They believe that fear of death makes humans weak. They don't understand that when you take away everything we have to live for, you create the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. Humans with nothing to lose. On ships throughout human space, crews gathered around their communication systems. In hidden bases on occupied worlds, resistance fighters leaned closer to their radios. On Earth itself, in the halls of government and the streets of every city, people stopped what they were doing to listen. The Calarian Empire is about to learn something about human nature that they should have discovered before they started this war, Torres said. They're going to learn that we don't fight for conquest, we don't fight for glory, we don't even fight for victory, we fight for each other. And when you murder 70,000 of our people in cold blood, when you broadcast their deaths as entertainment, you don't intimidate us. You unite us. She paused, letting her words reach every human ear in known space. The Calarians think they've ended a rebellion. They're wrong. They've just started the human war. And we're going to show them exactly what that means. The response was immediate. Across human space, civilian ships began broadcasting their availability for military service. Retired soldiers reported to recruitment centers. Factories that had been producing consumer goods switched to military production. Children too young to fight began learning advanced mathematics and engineering to support the war effort. But it was the Deep Space Monitoring Station at Wolf 359 that detected the first sign of what the human war would really look like. Dr. Elena Vasquez was a xenobiologist, not a military officer. Her job was to study alien life forms, catalog new species, and advance humanity's understanding of the galaxy's diverse ecosystems. She'd been monitoring Calarian communications for research purposes when the execution broadcast began. She'd watched the entire thing, documenting the alien psychology behind the mass murder, trying to understand the mindset of a species that could treat intelligent life so callously. It was important work. Knowing your enemy's psychology was crucial for developing effective counter-strategies. But as the hours passed after the broadcast, Vasquez noticed something in the Calarian communications networks that made her forget all about xenobiology. "This is Wolf 359 Deep Space Station to Fleet Command," she transmitted, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "I'm tracking unusual activity in the Calarian military communication networks. They're pulling back." The response came 8 minutes later, the delay of light-speed communication across interstellar distances. "Wolf 359, clarify your report. Pulling back from where?" Vasquez checked her instruments again, hardly believing what she was seeing. "From everywhere, Admiral. I'm monitoring fleet movements across 6 sectors. Calarian forces that were advancing on human colonies have stopped and are beginning to withdraw. Supply convoys are changing course. Even their civilian traffic is reducing." Another pause. Then Admiral Torres's voice came through clearly. "Dr. Vasquez, are you certain of these readings?" "Yes, ma'am. The pattern is unmistakable. The Calarians are consolidating their forces. It's like they're preparing for a defensive war instead of continuing their offensive operations." Torres was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, there was something like grim satisfaction in her voice. "Doctor, I want you to continue monitoring their communications. If you're right, if they're actually afraid of our response to the execution, then we may have just learned something very important about our enemy." What's that, Admiral? That maybe they're not as confident as they pretend to be. Maybe they understand something about human nature that we're just beginning to figure out ourselves. As the first day after the execution drew to a close, the balance of power in the galaxy began to shift in ways no one had anticipated. The Calarians had broadcast the deaths of 70,000 humans to demonstrate their strength. Instead, they had revealed their weakness. They had shown the galaxy that they were the kind of enemy who killed prisoners, the kind of enemy who murdered civilians, the kind of enemy who considered mass execution to be entertainment. And in doing so, they had answered the most important question in any war. What are you fighting for? For the Calarians, the answer was control, dominance, the expansion of their empire across the stars. These were abstract concepts that could be negotiated, compromised on, abandoned when the cost became too high. For humanity, the answer had just become much simpler. Survival, not just for themselves, but for their children, their values, their right to exist as free beings in a galaxy that had just shown them exactly what slavery looked like. The Calarians had wanted to intimidate humanity into submission. Instead, they had created an enemy that would never surrender, never negotiate, never stop fighting until one side or the other was completely destroyed. They had started the human war, and they were about to discover that humans had been preparing for it their entire history, even if they hadn't known it themselves. The real question wasn't whether humanity could defeat the Calarian Empire. The question was whether the galaxy would survive the war that was about to begin. The first attack came 72 hours after the execution. The Calarian supply depot at Kepler 442 was considered one of the most secure facilities in the outer territories, protected by 3 battle cruisers, a full regiment of ground forces, and defensive shields that could withstand direct bombardment from a dreadnought. Admiral Zektar received the initial report while reviewing casualty projections for the human colonies. The numbers were satisfactory. With organized resistance effectively eliminated, occupation forces could begin the systematic reduction of human population centers. Within 6 standard cycles, humanity would be diminished to a manageable workforce. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "priority transmission from Kepler 442. Zektar accepted the connection, expecting a routine status update. Instead, the image of Colonel Thekvar appeared on his screen. The Calarian officer's normally composed features twisted with confusion and anger. "Admiral, Kepler 442 depot has been destroyed. Complete loss of facility and all stored materials." "Destroyed?" Zektar's voice carried a note of disbelief. "By what force? Our intelligence indicated no human military assets within 50 light-years of your position." "That's the problem, sir. We never detected any incoming vessels. No energy signatures, no drive signatures, nothing. The depot simply erupted. Internal explosions across 7 warehouse complexes, followed by cascading detonations that consumed our fuel reserves." Zektar studied the tactical display, searching for explanations. "Sabotage. Human infiltrators must have placed explosives before the attack." "Negative, sir. The depot was constructed entirely by Calarian workers using imported materials. Security sweeps were conducted every cycle. There were no humans on station." "Then explain the explosions." Colonel Thekvar hesitated. "Sir, initial analysis suggests the explosions originated from our own supply containers. Specifically from medical supplies, food rations, and equipment spare parts we received from captured human vessels 3 cycles ago." The realization struck Zektar like a physical blow. "They booby-trapped their own supplies." "It appears so, sir, but not with conventional explosives. The detonations were precisely timed and positioned to create maximum cascade damage. Someone with intimate knowledge of our facility layout planned this attack." Zektar terminated the connection and immediately activated his security protocols. Within minutes, reports began flooding in from supply depots across Calarian space. Similar explosions at 17 different facilities. Hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies destroyed. Dozens of ships damaged or destroyed by contaminated materials. But it was the pattern of destruction that truly disturbed him. Each explosion had been precisely calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimal collateral damage. Fuel reserves destroyed, but not living quarters. Weapons stockpiles eliminated, but medical facilities untouched. It was as if the humans had intimate knowledge of every Calarian facility they'd targeted. The truth was simpler and more terrifying than Zektar could have imagined. Commander Sarah Chen had died on Morthen Station, but she'd lived long enough to see her people's true genius revealed. Not their technology, which was indeed inferior, not their numbers, which were pathetically small, but their understanding of warfare itself. Every human ship captured by the Calarians had been carrying standard supply containers, food, medical supplies, spare parts, all the mundane necessities of space travel. What the Calarians hadn't realized was that every item had been prepared according to Human Defense Corps protocols established centuries earlier. Dr. Marcus Webb had developed those protocols during Earth's colonial expansion period. His theory was simple. If humans were going to spread across the galaxy, they needed to be prepared for any threat. Every piece of equipment, every container of food, every medical supply kit was manufactured with dual capabilities. A protein ration bar could provide nutrition for weeks, or it could be chemically altered to create high-grade explosives. Medical scanner could diagnose injuries, or it could map enemy facility layouts through passive sensor sweeps. Communication devices could coordinate civilian activities, or they could create distributed networks for intelligence gathering and sabotage coordination. The Calarians had spent months studying captured human technology, never realizing that they were bringing weapons into the heart of their empire. Captain Rodriguez learned about the depot attacks while his makeshift fleet was still 3 days out from Calarian space. His 12 cargo ships had grown to 47 vessels as other human captains joined his unauthorized mission. They'd been expecting to fight their way through enemy patrols to reach military targets. Instead, they found the frontier almost undefended. "Captain," Lieutenant Santos reported from her position at the sensor station. "Long-range scans show significant gaps in the Calarian patrol grid. At least 6 standard patrol routes have been abandoned." Rodriguez studied the tactical display with growing amazement. "They're pulling back their forces. But why? Our intelligence suggested they were preparing for another offensive." The answer came in a coded transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Torres's voice was calm, professional, but Rodriguez could hear the satisfaction underneath. "All units, this is Fleet Command, with updated tactical assessment. Calarian forces are consolidating around their core systems. Intelligence suggests they're responding to what they perceive as a coordinated human infiltration and sabotage campaign. They're treating our supply depot attacks as the opening phase of a major offensive." Rodriguez felt a grin spread across his face. The Calarians thought the depot explosions were the beginning of a sophisticated military campaign. They had no idea that it was simply the natural consequence of human engineering philosophy applied to wartime conditions. "New orders, all units," Torres continued. "Take advantage of their redeployment, hit supply lines, communications relays, and isolated outposts. Make them think we have forces everywhere. Let them imagine threats that don't exist." Rodriguez turned to his crew. "You heard the Admiral. Santos, plot a course for the Calarian communication relay at Wolf 1061. Engineering, I want every non-essential system stripped for parts. If we're going to be pirates, we might as well look the part." The Wolf 1061 relay station was defended by a single patrol corvette and a handful of automated defense platforms. Against 47 human ships, it should have been suicide. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and flying vessels that were barely spaceworthy. They attacked anyway. The battle lasted exactly 11 minutes. not because the Calarians were overwhelmed by superior firepower, but because the humans fought like nothing the Calarians had ever encountered. Instead of maintaining formation and trading fire at long range, the human ships scattered in all directions, using asteroids and debris fields for cover. Instead of targeting the strongest Calarian positions, they focused on the communication equipment and support systems. The patrol corvette found itself chasing ghosts. Every time it locked weapons on a human ship, two more would appear from different directions. The humans seemed to be everywhere at once, their formation shifting and flowing like liquid mercury. Lieutenant Commander Velthak, commanding the corvette Righteous Fury, had trained extensively in combat tactics. He understood fleet movements, weapons ranges, and proper engagement protocols. But the humans weren't following any recognizable tactical doctrine. "Target the lead vessel," he ordered his weapons officer. "Which one, sir? They keep changing positions." "The largest ship. Focus fire and eliminate it." The weapons officer complied, directing energy beams toward what appeared to be a converted cargo hauler. The ship took several direct hits but continued maneuvering. Worse, instead of withdrawing or seeking cover, it accelerated directly toward the corvette. "Sir, the cargo vessel is on a collision course." Velthak stared at his screen in disbelief. "The human commander has lost his mind. Evasive maneuvers." But as the corvette changed course, the approaching cargo ship suddenly veered away at the last second. Its trajectory had been a feint. While Velthak's attention was focused on the apparent suicide run, 17 other human vessels had positioned themselves around the communication relay. The relay's destruction was surgical. Precise energy bursts targeted junction boxes, transmission arrays, and control systems. Within minutes, the entire facility was offline. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the human ships vanished into the asteroid field. Velthak found himself alone in space, his ship undamaged, but his mission a complete failure. The humans had achieved their objective without losing a single vessel. The report he filed with High Command was thorough and professional. It was also terrifying in its implications. "The human attack showed no regard for conventional tactical principles," he wrote. "Individual ship commanders appeared to operate independently while maintaining perfect coordination. They demonstrated willingness to accept extreme personal risk to achieve mission objectives. Most disturbing, they showed intimate knowledge of our communication protocols and defensive arrangements." Similar reports began reaching Admiral Zektar from across the frontier. Human attacks were occurring with increasing frequency, but they followed no recognizable pattern. Supply convoys would find their escort vessels disabled by precisely targeted strikes, then discover their cargo containers had been replaced with sensor beacons broadcasting Calarian military communications. Patrol bases would wake up to find their external weapon systems had been sabotaged overnight, apparently by infiltrators who could walk through solid walls. But it was the psychological impact that truly concerned Zektar. His officers were beginning to question their intelligence reports, their security procedures, their understanding of human capabilities. How could a species with inferior technology consistently outmaneuver their forces? How could humans appear and disappear without triggering any sensor alarms? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kethamar was the Calarian Empire's leading expert on xenopsychology. His studies of conquered species had helped develop the intimidation protocols that kept subject populations under control. He'd personally designed the execution broadcast to maximize psychological impact on human survivors. His analysis of human tactical behavior was devastating. "The fundamental error in our assessment," he reported to the High Command, "lies in our assumption that humans think like Calarians. We approach warfare as a contest between opposing civilizations. Victory is achieved through superior force applied according to established tactical principles." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing with the most disturbing part of his analysis. Humans appear to approach warfare as a survival mechanism. They don't fight to defeat enemies. They fight to eliminate threats. This distinction is crucial. A defeated enemy can be negotiated with, reasoned with, controlled. A eliminated threat ceases to exist. Admiral Zektar studied the report with growing unease. Are you suggesting that humans cannot be reasoned with? I'm suggesting something much worse, Admiral. I'm suggesting that we may have misunderstood the nature of human intelligence entirely. Their apparent willingness to sacrifice individual ships for minimal tactical gains, their disregard for standard operational security, their use of supposedly civilian vessels for military operations, these aren't signs of desperation or inferior training. Dr. Kethamar activated a holographic display showing recorded combat footage from recent human attacks. Watch this engagement carefully. The human ships appear to be acting independently, but notice the timing of their movements. Every maneuver is perfectly coordinated to support the overall mission. It's as if each ship captain can predict exactly what every other captain will do. Zektar observed the footage, noting the fluid way human formations shifted and adapted to changing tactical situations. Remarkable tactical discipline. No, Admiral, not discipline, intuition. These humans aren't following orders or tactical protocols. They're responding to the situation based on shared understanding of their mission objectives and complete trust in their fellow commanders. It's a level of coordination that our most advanced AI systems can barely achieve. The implications were staggering. If Dr. Kethamar was correct, humanity wasn't just another species with different technology and tactics. They represented a fundamentally different approach to organized conflict. What do you recommend, Doctor? Immediate strategic withdrawal to defensive positions around our core systems, full mobilization of all military assets, and a complete revision of our intelligence estimates regarding human capabilities. Zektar felt his confidence in easy victory beginning to crumble. Are you saying we cannot defeat them? I'm saying we may have declared war on a species that doesn't understand the concept of defeat. Look at their response to our execution broadcast. Instead of surrendering or negotiating, they immediately began military operations against our infrastructure. Instead of trying to protect their remaining population centers, they're actively seeking out combat with our forces. Dr. Kethamar highlighted data from recent engagements on his display. In 17 separate encounters, human forces have accepted casualty rates that would cause any rational military commander to retreat. But they don't retreat. They adapt, regroup, and attack again. It's as if the concept of acceptable losses simply doesn't exist in their strategic thinking. As if summoned by their conversation, an urgent transmission reached the command center. Colonel Tekvar's face appeared on the main screen, but his usual composure was entirely gone. Behind him, Zektar could see smoke and emergency lighting. Admiral, Kepler 442 base is under direct assault. Human ground forces have somehow bypassed our orbital defenses and are conducting operations inside our secure perimeter. How many humans? Unknown, sir. They appear to be operating in small teams using our own transportation network. But Admiral... Tekvar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They're not trying to capture the base or steal supplies. They're destroying everything systematically. Food stores, ammunition, fuel, even our medical facilities. It's like they want to make the entire installation unusable. Zektar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the command center's climate control. Colonel, implement Protocol 7 immediately. Seal all areas and prepare for evacuation. Sir, if we abandon this base, we lose our primary supply depot for the entire sector. If we stay, we lose the base and every soldier on it. Execute my orders. The transmission ended, leaving Zektar alone with Dr. Kethamar and the growing realization that the Kalarian Empire had made a catastrophic error. They had assumed that humanity would respond to the execution broadcast with either submission or desperate resistance. They had never considered the possibility that humans would respond with methodical, relentless warfare designed not to win battles, but to make continued occupation impossible. "Doctor," Zektar said quietly, "how long before these attacks reach our core systems?" Dr. Kethmar consulted his projections. "At current rate of escalation? Approximately 40 standard cycles, but Admiral, I don't think they're planning to attack our core systems." "Explain." "If my analysis is correct, humans aren't trying to conquer Calarian territory. They're trying to make it too expensive for us to maintain our expansion into human space. Every supply depot we lose, every communication relay that goes offline, every patrol that doesn't return increases the cost of occupying human worlds." Zektar understood the strategy now, and it terrified him. "They're going to bleed us until we withdraw." "Worse than that, Admiral. They're going to bleed us until our own citizens begin questioning whether this war is worth the cost. And based on what I've observed of human tactical capabilities, they can sustain this type of warfare indefinitely." As if to emphasize Dr. Kethmar's point, another urgent transmission arrived. This time it was from Admiral Vex Thule, commanding the Calarian Fourth Fleet. "Zektar, we need to discuss strategy immediately. My supply lines are completely compromised. I'm losing more ships to human raiders than to direct combat. If this continues, I'll have to withdraw my entire fleet for resupply and repair." The pattern was becoming clear. Across the frontier, Calarian forces were discovering that their technological advantage meant nothing when their enemies refused to fight conventional battles. Instead, humans attacked infrastructure, supplies, communications, and morale with surgical precision. They weren't trying to defeat the Calarian Empire in glorious battle. They were trying to make the Empire's existence so difficult and expensive that conquest would become impossible. Admiral Zektar realized he was facing an enemy that had studied war not as an art or science, but as a fundamental law of nature. Humans didn't fight for victory. They fought for survival. And they had apparently concluded that their survival required the complete elimination of Calarian presence in human space. The execution broadcast had been intended to demonstrate Calarian power and end human resistance. Instead, it had taught humanity exactly what they needed to know about their enemies. The Calarians were willing to murder civilians. They were willing to broadcast executions as entertainment. They were the kind of enemy that could never be negotiated with, reasoned with, or trusted. They were the kind of enemy that had to be destroyed. And now, Zektar was beginning to suspect that humanity was uniquely equipped to do exactly that. The end began 6 weeks after the execution, when Admiral Zektar received an impossible transmission. He was reviewing casualty reports from the frontier when his communications officer announced an incoming message from human space. Not intercepted communications between human vessels, but a direct transmission addressed specifically to him, broadcast on secure Calarian military frequencies. "Sir," the officer reported, confusion clear in his voice, "the transmission is requesting a meeting." Zektar's 4 arms tensed simultaneously. "A meeting? With whom?" "Admiral Rebecca Torres of the Human Defense Corps. She says she wants to discuss terms." For a moment, Zektar felt a surge of satisfaction. The human commander was finally ready to surrender. 6 weeks of raiding and sabotage had apparently taught humanity the futility of resisting imperial might. Then he reviewed the tactical situation more carefully. In 6 weeks, human forces had destroyed 47 supply depots, eliminated 33 communication relays, and disabled or destroyed over 200 Calarian vessels. 3 entire sectors had been forced to withdraw their occupation forces due to unsustainable losses. The cost of maintaining the war had already exceeded the projected economic benefits of conquering human space. Perhaps Admiral Torres wanted to discuss terms, but Zektar suspected they wouldn't be terms of surrender. "Where does she want to meet?" "Neutral space, sir. The asteroid belt at coordinates 847.6 by 233.2. She's requesting both fleets maintain minimum escort and agree to ceasefire protocols during negotiations. Zektar studied the proposed coordinates. The location was roughly equidistant between Calarian and human space, in an uninhabited system with no strategic value. It was, he admitted reluctantly, a reasonable choice for negotiations. Inform Admiral Torres that I agree to her terms. Standard diplomatic escort of 7 vessels each. Ceasefire in effect for 72 standard cycles. What Zektar didn't realize was that Admiral Torres had chosen the location for reasons that had nothing to do with neutrality. The asteroid belt at 847.6 by 233.2 contained the wreckage of a human civilian transport that had been destroyed by Calarian forces 3 months earlier. The ship had been carrying 400 colonists, families relocating to the frontier worlds, men, women, children who had never taken up arms against anyone. Torres wanted Zektar to see what his empire had accomplished in its quest for galactic dominance. The meeting took place aboard the human vessel Remembrance, a converted science ship that had been hastily equipped with diplomatic facilities. When Zektar's shuttle docked with the human vessel, he was surprised to find himself greeted by an honor guard of human soldiers. They didn't point weapons at him. They didn't demonstrate any hostility whatsoever. They simply stood at attention as he passed, their eyes following his movement with the kind of professional interest that elite soldiers showed when studying a particularly dangerous enemy. Admiral Torres was waiting in the ship's conference room. She was smaller than Zektar had expected, almost fragile by Calarian standards. But when she stood to greet him, he recognized the same quality he'd seen in Commander Chen's eyes just before the execution. These humans simply did not know how to submit. Admiral Zektar, Torres said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Zektar ignored the outstretched hand, settling into the specially prepared chair his staff had provided. Admiral Torres, I assume you're ready to discuss the terms of your species' surrender. Torres sat down across from him, her expression unchanged. Actually, I'm here to offer you a chance to surrender. The audacity of the statement left Zektar momentarily speechless. Behind Torres, 2 human officers maintained perfect poker faces, but he could sense their anticipation. They were serious. You cannot be serious, Zektar finally managed. Your species is outnumbered 50-1. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your total military consists of converted civilian vessels and amateur soldiers. All true, Torres agreed calmly. But you're missing some important factors in your analysis. She activated a holographic display showing the current tactical situation across both empires. Calarian territory appeared in red, human space in blue, with contested areas marked in purple. 6 weeks ago, you controlled 15 systems in what used to be human space. Today, you control 3. Your supply lines have been compromised across 7 sectors. You've been forced to withdraw over 200 ships for repair and refit. Your expansion into our territory has effectively stopped. Zektar studied the display, looking for errors in the data. He found none. Temporary setbacks. The Empire will adapt and overcome your terrorist tactics. I don't think you understand what's happening here, Admiral. Torres manipulated the display, showing casualty figures and resource expenditures. You're not losing a war. You're losing an empire. She highlighted economic data that made Zektar's stomach clench with fear. The cost of the human war wasn't being borne by the frontier territories. It was being absorbed by the core systems, the wealthy worlds that formed the economic foundation of Calarian power. Your citizens are beginning to ask why they should sacrifice their prosperity to occupy a handful of primitive colonies, Torres continued. Your military commanders are questioning why they should risk their careers on a war that produces nothing but casualties. Your political leaders are starting to wonder if expansion into human space is worth destabilizing your entire empire. Torres was right, and Zektar knew it. Reports from the capital had been increasingly pessimistic. The Imperial Council was demanding explanations for the mounting costs. Several sector governors had privately questioned the wisdom of continuing the campaign. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "Complete withdrawal of Calarian forces from all human systems, reparations for damaged civilian infrastructure, and formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty." Zektar's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Impossible. The Empire does not negotiate with inferior species." "We do not pay reparations to terrorists." "Then let me show you something that might change your perspective." Torres activated another section of the display, showing real-time sensor data from the surrounding space. Zektar expected to see the small escort fleets they had agreed upon for the negotiations. Instead, he saw over 300 human vessels arranged in precise formation around the asteroid belt. "You violated our ceasefire agreement," he said, reaching for the emergency communicator that would summon his escort. "No, Admiral. Look at the sensor data more carefully." Zektar studied the readings again. The human vessels were maintaining position well outside the agreed-upon neutral zone. They weren't targeting his ships or demonstrating any hostile intent. They were simply there. 300 ships, Torres said quietly. Volunteers from across human space. Cargo haulers, passenger transports, mining vessels, even a few luxury yachts. None of them are proper warships, but every single one is crewed by humans who watched your execution broadcast. She stood up and moved to the conference room's viewport. "Would you like to meet some of them?" Before Zektar could respond, the main display activated to show the interior of one of the human vessels. A woman in civilian clothes appeared on screen, but her bearing and confidence identified her as a ship's captain. "I'm Captain Jennifer Walsh," the woman said. "I used to run medical supplies to frontier colonies. My ship isn't armed, but I've spent the last 6 weeks loading Calarian wounded from disabled vessels and delivering them to neutral space for repatriation." The display switched to another ship. This time, a man in engineer's coveralls appeared. "Captain David Kim, formerly of the merchant vessel Lucky Strike. I've been coordinating search and rescue operations in combat zones. So far, my crew has saved over 400 Calarian personnel who would have died in space." Ship after ship appeared on the display. Human captains, engineers, doctors, even children who had volunteered to help with the war effort. None of them spoke of victory or conquest. They talked about rescue operations, medical aid, and efforts to minimize casualties among both human and Calarian forces. Zektar felt something he hadn't experienced since the war began. Genuine confusion. "I don't understand. Your people are conducting warfare operations against our forces." "Yes," Torres agreed. "We're fighting for our survival. But we're not monsters, Admiral. Every time we disable one of your ships, we send rescue teams to evacuate the crew. Every time we destroy one of your supply depots, we make sure your personnel have safe passage to neutral territory." She returned to her seat, her expression serious but not hostile. "We're showing you something that your species apparently doesn't understand. It's possible to be deadly enemies and still maintain basic decency toward each other." The statement hit Zektar like a physical blow. In 6 weeks of warfare, he hadn't received a single report of humans executing prisoners, torturing captives, or targeting civilian populations. Even their most devastating attacks had been carefully planned to minimize loss of life. "Why?" he asked, the question emerging before he could stop himself. "Because that's who we are," Torres replied simply. "We fight when we have to. We kill when we have no choice. But we don't murder civilians for entertainment. We don't broadcast executions as political theater. We don't turn warfare into a spectacle for the masses." She leaned forward, her voice becoming more intense. You want to know the real difference between humans and Calarians, Admiral? You executed 70,000 prisoners because you thought it would intimidate us. We've captured over 800 of your personnel in the last 6 weeks, and every single one of them is alive and receiving medical care in our detention facilities. The implications of her words struck Zektar with devastating force. The moral superiority she was claiming wasn't just propaganda, it was demonstrable fact. In every engagement, in every battle report, human forces had followed rules of conduct that Calarian military doctrine didn't even acknowledge. But we could change that, Torres continued, her tone becoming colder. We could start executing prisoners. We could target civilian populations. We could show you the same mercy you showed Commander Chen and her people. Zektar felt his throat constrict. The thought of 300 human vessels filled with beings who had every reason to hate his species, but who had somehow maintained their moral principles even in the face of genocide, was more terrifying than any weapon. Is that a threat? No, Admiral. It's a choice. You can continue this war and we'll continue to fight it according to our principles. We'll rescue your wounded, treat your prisoners humanely, and limit our attacks to military targets. Or, she paused, letting the word hang in the air. Or you can force us to become like you. You can push us until we decide that your species doesn't deserve the mercy we've been showing. You can keep killing our civilians until we decide to respond in kind. Torres stood up again, moving to a wall display that showed images from the execution broadcast. Commander Chen's face appeared, along with photos of the 70,000 humans who had died on Morthen Station. These people died because they believed in something better than survival of the strongest. They believed in dignity, justice, and the idea that intelligent beings could coexist without one species enslaving another. You killed them to prove that strength was the only truth in the galaxy. Her voice became quiet, almost sad. But here's what you didn't understand, Admiral. When you murdered those people, you didn't prove that strength is everything. You proved that your species is fundamentally broken. You proved that Calarians are incapable of recognizing the difference between power and righteousness. Zektar wanted to protest, to defend his people's honor, but the words wouldn't come. Torres was describing his species' nature with surgical accuracy, and he couldn't deny the truth of her assessment. So here's my offer, Torres continued. Withdraw from human space. Acknowledge that your expansion was a mistake. Accept reparations for the damage you've caused. In return, humanity will treat this as a misunderstanding between civilizations rather than a fundamental conflict between incompatible species. And if I refuse? Torres returned to her seat, her expression grave. Then you'll discover what happens when you force humans to abandon their principles. You'll learn what we're capable of when we stop trying to be better than our enemies. The threat was delivered without emotion, without drama, but it carried more weight than any military demonstration. Zektar realized he was looking at the most dangerous enemy the Calarian Empire had ever faced. Not because humans were stronger or more advanced, but because they were better. They were everything the Calarians pretended to be: disciplined, honorable, principled. But unlike the Calarians, humans actually lived according to their stated values, even when it cost them tactically. I need to consult with the High Command, Zektar said finally. Of course, but Admiral... Torres activated the display one final time, showing the current positions of human and Calarian forces. While you're consulting, remember that we have 300 ships here and thousands more throughout human space. Every single one is crewed by volunteers who watched your execution broadcast. She paused, letting him absorb the implications. They're not here because I ordered them to be. They're here because they chose to be. Because when you showed them what the Calarian Empire really represents, they decided that some things are worth fighting for. The meeting ended with formal diplomatic protocols, but Zektar knew the war was effectively over. not because humanity had demonstrated superior military power, but because they had demonstrated superior moral authority. When he returned to his flagship, Admiral Zektar filed his report with the High Command. It was brief, professional, and devastating in its conclusions. The human war cannot be won through military means. The enemy demonstrates tactical capabilities that exceed our intelligence projections. More critically, human forces maintain operational cohesion and moral authority that makes continued occupation of their territory untenable. Recommend immediate negotiation of withdrawal terms. The response from the capital came 18 hours later. Recommendation accepted. Begin negotiations for complete withdrawal from human space. 3 months after the execution broadcast that was supposed to end human resistance, the Calarian Empire signed the Treaty of Proxima Centauri. Calarian forces withdrew from all human systems. Reparations were paid for damaged civilian infrastructure. Formal recognition was granted to human territorial sovereignty. But the most significant clause in the treaty was one that Admiral Torres had insisted upon personally. A joint commission would be established to oversee prisoner exchanges and ensure proper treatment of captured personnel in any future conflicts. The Calarians had learned something about warfare that they hadn't understood before. The strongest enemy wasn't necessarily the one with the best weapons or the largest fleet. Sometimes, the strongest enemy was the one who could fight without losing their soul. Commander Sarah Chen had been right. The execution broadcast hadn't ended a rebellion. It had started a war. But not the kind of war anyone had expected. It had been a war between two fundamentally different ideas of what civilization meant. And when it ended, the galaxy had learned something important about humanity. They were the species that would risk everything to save enemy wounded. They were the people who would treat prisoners with dignity even while fighting for their own survival. They were the civilization that could wage total war while maintaining the moral principles that made victory worthwhile. The Calarian Empire continued to exist, but it never again attempted to expand into human space. They had learned that some enemies were too dangerous to fight, not because they were too strong, but because they were too good. And across the galaxy, other species took note of what had happened when an empire based on intimidation and conquest tried to break a people whose strength came from their refusal to abandon their principles. Humanity had proven that the greatest victories weren't won through superior firepower. They were won by being worthy of victory. The 70,000 who died on Morthen Station had been proven right. Some things were worth fighting for. Some principles were worth dying for, and some enemies were worth forgiving, even when forgiveness seemed impossible. That was the human way. That was what made them dangerous. That was what made them human.